Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I've just been taking a nice break with coffee and I was just thinking, oh, that coffee is perfect. But it didn't have to be perfect, just nice. But perfection came into my mind. And there's a core teaching I would return to in my practice. And that is that the Spirit does not require a perfect vessel. It just requires a willing one. It just requires a willing one. Now, that is going to resonate with quite a few of you because we're always seeking perfection. And this single idea holds the key to loosening the grip of fear of failure. There is a core teaching I would always return to in my practice, and that is that Spirit does not require a perfect vessel. They only require a willing one. They only require a willing one. And this single idea holds the key to loosening the grip of fear of failure, of imposter syndrome, procrastination, and the stress of feeling inadequate that burdens so many of us on this path. We invest so much energy trying to perfect the vessel, our minds, our emotions, our lives, that we forget the most crucial part is simply our willingness to show up, just be an open channel and to participate. So today I'll look at what this actually asks of us and why the impulse toward perfection is really a defense against the vulnerability that Spirit communication requires, and often the very belief that hampers it. Many of us carry the belief that to connect with Spirit intelligence, our minds must be like a placid lake, completely still and clear. Yet this very image we strive for often becomes the obstacle that stops the flow of communication. It helps us if we dissect the misunderstanding between what are genuinely high standards and the insidious nature of spiritual perfectionism. The former is characterized by a gentle pull towards growth, a grounded curiosity to deepen one's practice. And the latter is a rigid, fear-based demand for flawlessness that arises not from reverence but from inadequacy and our own ego. It quietly installs a false prerequisite for any spiritual engagement. You see, the idea that connection requires a pristine emotional and mental landscape is crazy. That condition is by its very nature impossible to achieve within the human experience, and so we should abandon any notion of it if we wish to achieve Spirit communication. Because this impossibility is precisely where the ego finds its leverage, by creating a standard that can never be met, it shields itself from the risk of a genuine unscripted encounter with the presence other than its own. And beneath that shield is a fear that one's own shortcomings will be revealed, will be found out. And this internal dynamic almost always manifests as procrastination, chronic procrastination. The perfect moment to sit for development, to meditate, or to simply be still never really arrives because the conditions are never quite right. The kids aren't asleep, the workday was too stressful, the room's too noisy, the mind is too busy. So over time, this breeds a cycle of perceived failure that reinforces the belief that you're not ready or capable. It's a shame, isn't it? And the impulse toward ultimate control is contradictory to what Spirit are trying to achieve. And it attempts to manage and curate the experience ahead of time, which is the opposite of the responsive surrender that allows a channel to open. The fundamental difference to grasp is motive. High standards are propelled by love of the practice, an authentic desire to learn and expand. Spiritual perfectionism, by contrast, is driven by a dread of not being good enough for it. And no matter how dedicated you are, that's just motivating your ego. It has become all about you. But wait, I hear the cries of, I'm trying to be perfect to bring comfort to others. Yet, others rarely ask you to be perfect for them. It is a self-imposed pressure you have heaped upon yourself. I've done it many times. Recognizing this distinction is the first step toward dissolving the block. When you're operating from a need to control both the process and the outcome, you are actively sabotaging the flow of authentic communication. It's like trying to have a conversation after you've already scripted the other person's lines. Any information that deviates from the script, a fleeting image, a subtle feeling, a non-linear thought, is dismissed as noise. The door with spirit is closed before anyone has had the chance to knock. Now that's sad. And you can really notice this pattern when your focus shifts from the experience of connecting to the performance of connecting. What was once a communion becomes a test you are bracing yourself to fail. The pressure escalates, not from spirit, but from within you. That pressure is the signature of the fear it conceals. And because the criteria remain unattainable, your practice becomes a series of auditions for a part you already believe you cannot land. Thirsty work. Imperfect coffee, but very nice. This is how the ideal poisons the well. It convinces you to distrust the ordinary, overlook the subtle, and wait for conditions that will just never come. If the trap is an idealized state that excludes our actual present moment mind, then the way through will involve a different orientation to what arises, especially the small, partial, and easily ignored signals that don't fit a perfect image. The antidote of the willing channel brings us to the heart of the remedy. What if the most potent spiritual communications are not the grand cinematic revelations we idealize, but the fleeting, half-formed, messy insights we often discarded as insignificant? And the cure for this spiritual paralysis involves consciously embracing the vulnerability of being an imperfect, but willing and open channel. This asks us to stay with the discomfort that arises when received information doesn't match our preconceived ideals of what a profound spiritual experience should look like. We must examine the tendency to reject those humble impressions, a brief image that makes no logical sense, a half-formed thought that feels incomplete, an intuitive nudge that seems random. This dismissal is subtle but powerful. Vulnerability in this context is not a weakness. It is the true prerequisite for deep connection. It is the courage to show up exactly as you are, in your current state, distracted, tired, anxious, joyful, and declare your simple willingness to receive. This single shift in focus changes the entire dynamic. The goal is no longer to achieve a flawless mental state, but to cultivate an open one. What spirit intelligence actually requires from you is not a pristine vessel, but a present and a willing one. Your presence, your awareness in this moment is the field upon which communication can occur. Your willingness is the invitation, and the transformation that occurs when you surrender the need to control it is meaningful. Your relationship with spirit communication shifts from performance and anxiety to partnership and trust. I find that powerful as a statement. But it's true. And this foundation allows for a more consistent and authentic flow of information because it is no longer being filtered through the ego's fear of getting it wrong. So it's not an intellectual concept to be memorized that I'm talking about. It's an experiential reality to be lived. It is a fundamental shift from striving for an unattainable ideal to accepting simply what is. From this acceptance, a sustainable connection blossoms. If you choose to work with this orientation, you will notice that what once felt like interference becomes data. What once felt like failure becomes information. And the practice is to trust the small beginnings and to let them lead, even when the mind protests their inadequacy. Each time you allow a modest impression to breathe, rather than correcting it into a polished ideal, you strengthen the channel that knows how to respond, rather than to control. Hold this as your working stance. Willingness over flawlessness, presence over performance. And from that stance, the path ahead becomes less about improvement and more about remembering what is already available when you show up just as you are. The spiritual path is not a journey toward becoming a perfect, flawless vessel. It is a practice of remembering that you are and have always been a willing one. The resistance you feel is less about imperfection and more about the ego's fear of being seen in your honest, human authenticity. So this week, notice when the impulse for perfection arises, and instead of trying to fix it, meet it with the quiet acknowledgement of, I am. And notice what shifts when you offer acceptance instead of striving. Please do share in the comments what messy insights you chose to honor in the past and how you got through them. And just come and say hello in the comments. That's always great too. And if you haven't already, please like, thumbs up, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future.